Now let's talk about punctuation, commas, full stops and capitalization. When we now see the table, this writing here, which is not the same as you've seen before in previous writings, and when you looked at coherence and cohesion, for example, or lexical resource, this now has been changed. So what do you notice about the commas, the full stop and the capitalization? So as we go through it by sentence, yes, there's a mistake there, not using a full stop and not using the comma after income. In detail, missing the little comma there. Quite often, after a little phrase to introduce a paragraph, you should have a comma. And I am guilty of this mistake as well. So I make sure I always come back and check that carefully myself. Turning to expenditures, again, similar to in detail. After that, we need the comma there. And also we need it after revenue. Finally there they have a full stop missing in a capital letter. So now let's think about simple or complex sentences. In this one here, which has been changed again, it's been corrected, but there's been another change made. Are these mostly simple or complex sentences? Oh, they're mostly simple, aren't they? So now think about how you could combine these sentences here. Some of these sentences can certainly combine. For example, in the blue there, instead of a full stop, they could have said while program services and then the P small. Remember also that in Task 1 writing, you're only writing about 7 sentences in Task 1 writing. So not all of your sentences have to be complex, but you should try for 3 or 4 really that are complex. It's going to help your mark. Now we'll look at how they could have combined those sentences here. So on the left is what you were just looking at, and on the right here we've got some examples. So we've just talked about that one. Let's move to the next one. So we'll pause here. You can see that paragraph. How do you think some of those sentences could be combined? So here we have it here. Here's one good example. So not changing the first one. Don't try and connect that because it's very different information. So that wouldn't be a good idea to try and combine that. However, the next one we certainly could. And then with this, which was considerably higher, this becomes very complex sentence. And then, now in the final one, you do the same thing. Just pause there and think, how could that be changed? They have a very simple linking phrase. They've kept it the same though, turning to expenditures. You could have put a comma there and said this was similar to revenue with one large percentage. So this was similar to revenue with one large percentage, which accounted for the highest percentage with almost 96%. So they're just changing the structure slightly to combine them more easily. And that's a good way to try and connect your sentences together. So notice there are some short sentences. The turning to expenditures was very short, and the in detail revenue sources was 53,561,580. That's quite short, those 2 sentences, but that's fine because they're followed by quite complicated sentences. Now we have to think about the passive or the active voice. So when we have a think about this table here, have a look at what kind of grammar structure again is the person using here, and look at the verb forms again here. Now they using the passive or the active voice. And the important question is, what should they be using? So when we have a look at it now, you see in the black box at the top right, we're mentioning overuse. Yes, this is very common that students overuse the passive voice. I'm not quite sure why, but we don't need the was there. They're trying to use the passive voice, I think. But over here we see that really is a passive voice mistake. Don't use the passive voice at all, okay? Just keep it simple in this kind of table. It's complicated enough with all this data. So you can try and make it complicated maybe by using the past perfect. If we looked at dropped significantly to 550,000 in 2006, they could have then said and had decreased to further 50,000 by the final year. And that would show that you know you can use the past perfect for a change in the past. We see the same mistake there, was studying. There's no need for that was. Right, so here's a little activity for you. Noun phrases are important. We've been talking about verbs a lot, but it's also good to use some noun phrases. And I'll give you a little clue. These are very similar to relative clauses, a defining relative clause. So can you put those words that are scrambled there together to make a noun phrase that is the same meaning as the one above? So those 5 words there connect to preschool students, and on the other side the 4 connect to university students. Another thing you can do then is try and switch the pattern across from one to the other. Now this kind of thing also helps with vocab and coherence and cohesion. It's like substitution for coherence and cohesion, and it's showing a good use of a lexical chunk for vocab, if you can do that, as well as being good for grammar. So now we're going to focus on subordinate clauses. Now these are quite complicated, but what it means is this is extra information in a sentence. Just what you've just practiced, for example, is adding to that. You are adding information to the main noun there. So all these examples add information to the noun phrase, and they are examples of high-level grammar. So we give you an example of one there, which is similar to what you just practiced actually. Students who studied at 4 Australian learning institutions. Now what you need to do is try and find some examples of that in the other 2 body paragraphs here. Now let's have a look at them. We've already looked at that one, so let's look over here now where there's some very good examples of this here. So this is a non-defining relative clause, the first one, which was 650,000. What that means is we could take that chunk out and the sentence would still make sense. The next one is similar to the first one. You notice almost exactly the same as the first body paragraph. And then in the middle there they have a very complicated non-defining clause. But a good one to use there, because 700,000 is the highest and it hadn't been mentioned, so that's a good way to mention extra data. So doing that would help your task achievement score as well as grammar. And finally down the bottom they've got another non-defining clause when they talk about the change. And that's a good way of getting around talking about all the middle data as well. In the final sentence, now this is again is similar, but notice how the defining clause here has changed. So before it was students who studied, and now it's students who were studying. So they're using a continuous past tense to connect to students. So that's a good example of variety. And down the bottom there, they've just dropped in the by 11,000. So they are examples of high level. If for example you're searching for a 7 or an 8 for grammar, or maybe a 9, that's the kind of language you need to be producing. If you need a 6, band score 6 for grammar, you don't need to be too concerned about these subordinate clauses. It's really for high level